Every story has a backstory. Some just aren't as obvious as others. This is that kind of a story. It starts in the Sandhill Dunes, east of Albuquerque, in the early 1930s, when my dad was a young man. The area, right here, later became Roosevelt Park, the city's first public park. My dad had a buddy, Elmer Young. They hung out together a lot. They used to go see the old black and white gangster movies at the Nickelodeon Theater. And they had this great idea one time that they were going to try doing a smoke screen, like the way the gangsters did the smoke screen in the movies. And so they rigged up a can with oil in it dripping onto the hot exhaust manifold of their car, and they drove around this park and laid down their smoke screen. They were both World War II veterans. My dad served in the Army Air Corps. Elmer served in the Navy. Dad didn't talk an awful lot about the war. He told us some stories. We didn't realize until after he died back in 2007 at the age of 90 that he had several Bronze Stars. And after the war, my dad gets a job with the base engineers at a place called Sandia Base. They were building this secret underground base in the mountain called Site Able, and later on it was called Monsanto Base. Maybe you've never heard of it, but it's about as important in the lore of secret technology as is Area 51, perhaps. This story is also about this typewriter that I bought from a guy who lived in that house across the street from the park. This is one of those stories that's really one story wrapped inside another story, like a riddle inside of an enigma. And it doesn't seem like the two stories match or fit, but they do. There's some kind of a connection here between this typewriter, my dad's history here in this town, and my history. Yesterday, of course, being Father's Day, but it's really interesting. There is some kind of connection here, and I'm trying to decipher what that is. And I think we need to go from here in central Albuquerque up to the very far southeast corner of Albuquerque. There was a neighborhood called Four Hills. It was an upper middle class custom ranch home neighborhood. The name of the community, Four Hills, is named after these four mountains in a row sitting adjacent to this neighborhood. And you and I can't go to those mountains. We can't climb them because those four hills are Site Able, Monsanto Base, the secret underground nuclear weapons base that my dad worked at when they were building it in the early 50s. Behind me is the Four Hills Monsanto Base Site Able area, just beyond that fence with the warning sign. And this is the Four Hills neighborhood. And the thing that struck me so much about this neighborhood is this was an upper middle class custom home neighborhood built in the 1950s in the height of the Cold War, situated essentially at ground zero, right adjacent to the secret Monsanto base, the underground base in the mountains right there. And this whole neighborhood would have been consumed by Soviet thermonuclear weapons if World War III had broke out. And the ironic thing is many of the people who live in this community work at Sandia Base and work at Sandia Labs. So there's a huge irony there, which I think is just amazing. Did they know something that we didn't know? Or was it fatalism that drew them here? On the other side of that fence is Monsanto Base and those Four Hills. Buried inside A lot of mysteries are left buried there. There's a lot of urban legends about Manzano Base that are of the same kind of magnitude as Area 51 in Nevada. A lot of mysterious things, a lot of it's probably hokum, but that's the problem with secrecy, right? There's always room for conjecture, and the person's imagination goes wild. But the connection with this story today is that my dad worked there when they were building it, and worked the rest of his career in the nuclear weapons field in the U.S. government. And this whole neighborhood back behind me, this Four Hills, this custom home, upper middle class neighborhood, built essentially at ground zero, if there was a World War III, was a place that we would often drive to look at the yards, the landscaping, the homes, fantasize about what we could do with our home. And it's just interesting on this day after Father's Day in 2019, thinking about my dad. These kind of places remind me of him. There's a lot of secrecy remaining about what his career entailed, and which is true with a lot of people that worked in that field, but that's why I'm out here at Four Hills. It's a funny thing about this fence line. This separates Kirtland Air Force Base from the civilian world. And if you follow this hiking trail up parallel to the fence line, up toward the Manzano Mountains, there's a point where the fence ends. The fence ends, and you can walk around the fence and get into the military reservation, which you probably don't want to do, but it's funny, the fences only go up so far. We find fences in our lives, barriers, mysteries on the other side of the fence. We don't really know where the fences end, where they begin, really. But this story within a story, gets us back to that Smith Corona typewriter that I bought down at Roosevelt Park. Back to Roosevelt Park. This house behind me is where I answered the Craigslist ad for this typewriter. It was one of the filthiest places I've ever seen, and a very colorful person lived there. And the machine, though it basically was functional, it needed extensive bouts of cleaning over a period of months, even about a year, before it gained any kind of reliability. Even then, it had this nagging skipping problem that was only resolved after I'd acquired a typewriter repair Bible from Ted Monk and went through the entire Smith Corona alignment procedure for the escapement for the 5 series typewriters. This story is also a story of resurrection, of how this one machine fell into a state of disrepair through who knows what kind of abuse over the decades, to its current state of functionality. But I wanted it to be better, to be just like it was new back in those Cold War days of 1951, the year this typewriter was made. And so I sent off the platen, feed rollers, and even the paper bale rollers to J.J. Short & Sons to be recovered with fresh rubber. After about 3 weeks, I received the parts back and then reinstalled them. A pretty straightforward process on these 5 series machines. I also did a more thorough round of cleaning the machine and the case, which went a long way toward eliminating the rest of the residual odors remaining from its former life. The result is that this machine is like a kind of time machine, in that it's as close as you can get to how it was when it came off the assembly line back in the early 1950s. It's not perfect in appearance. It shows those battle scars from a life lived hard, but it types wonderfully. These kinds of objects we tend to endow with memories. They become a kind of totem that encompasses our family or clan's history. I've kind of done that with this machine on purpose, weaving this tale of Depression-era youth and Cold War nuclear intrigue into the geography of Albuquerque, where both my dad and I were born and raised. Sometime in the very late 1950s or early 1960s, while Dad was busy with his career out on Sandia Base, I was sitting in my mother's lap watching her type a letter. This would be my earliest memory of both her and of typewriters. I still don't know what kind of make or model of typewriter it was, and after she died when I was aged 5, none of my brothers can remember having the typewriter or seeing it around the house, so maybe it was discarded with some of her personal effects. But that snapshot of a memory has stayed with me all these years and kind of informs my passion for these writing machines. You know, this typewriter kind of connects me with the history of this city park because, of course, my dad hung around this area even before it was a grassy park and it was just sand hills east of town when he was a young man in the late 20s and early 30s. And I, as a young man back in the 60s and early 70s, we went down here. Dad would take us down here on a Sunday and we'd walk around. I remember my brother found a watch here, a pocket knife, and all kinds of things. But right on the corner up there is the house where I bought this typewriter back a few years ago. So this typewriter kind of makes a connection in time between me and my dad and this park and this city. And this is where the two stories intersect, because somewhere in the very early 1950s, about 1951, when my dad got that job running the warehouse when they were building Manzano Base, the secret underground bomb factory and storage facility, this typewriter was being manufactured in, I think, Connecticut. So the same year, roughly, these two were connected in time and really in place. And this city park, Roosevelt Park, kind of ties it all together. I bought this across the street. My dad hung out here as a kid. I hung out here as a kid. Here we are, full circle.